Hello, welcome to Burley Books, or my spare room, the virtual space tonight, where we will be holding an event in celebration of the launch of Rachel Genn's What You Could Have Won. So I just wanted to start off by giving a few logistical pointers. Rachel will start the event with a reading. And she'll tell you a little bit about the book, and then our digital wizard Somaya, resident digital wizard Somaya, will run the Q&A with Rachel, and then after that we'll be taking questions, taking questions from the comments and putting them to Rachel. So that's it. And I also just wanted to say, because I'm a bookseller and it's always going to be mentioned, that Rachel's book is our pick this month for our indie fiction book subscription. So there is, if you haven't already got a copy of Rachel's fantastic book, there is still time to sign up on our website, and we'll be delivering signed copies directly to your door. So don't miss out on that. And yeah, with that, I'd like to just pass over to Rachel.
Hello everyone. Unfortunately, I can only get my computer to look at my face like this, and so I'm sorry I look a bit like an omelette. I'm going to start with I think where Henry and Astrid meet for the first time, because it involves Bird Boy, who is quite a significant element of the a kind of nodal point of their relationship. Bird Boy is based on an actual case, a neuropsychological case of a person who has no eye movements and so moves their head like an eyeball would to accommodate when reading. This is kind of incidental, but it's also fairly central to the way that science finds its way into stories for me. I go for the things that are kind of semi-unbelievable, poetic, tragic at the same time, I guess, like everyone does. But I thought I'd give you a bit of background to that. Henry has gone to a charity gig that Astrid is playing at, and it's the first time he's seen her on stage. I'm going to take it from that point in the book, which is fairly close to the beginning. You grabbed his hand, this is Astrid, and tugged him through the clusters of associates and partners. You snuck him past security out into the balcony, where neither of you had acknowledged the magnificent view of downtown above the handrail. First, he made you laugh, pretending to know about electro. From this, you got onto the tedium of cocaine compared to meth. Next, he pressed into your hand what he said he'd brought for himself. For a good half hour of speaking with him, you hadn't been able to tell if he was psychotic. 2 hours later, you were sitting at his feet. A bird boy, you asked. Not his official name, said Henry, but this bird boy can read. He can't move his eyes. His head moves like a bird's to make up for that. Would a person be able to tell? Henry thought for a second. I have never seen a busier neck than his. Your pupils spread like dinner plates at this, and you felt the need to set up a recording of your conversation, imagining his answers ticker taping from a tiny slot in the back of your head, gently parting your hair and coiling between the soles of your feet. Who says busier neck? You were falling for busier neck. I started imagining a beak for him today. Henry tapped his nose briefly on an imaginary piece of wood in front of his face. Silently, you begged him, don't do that. So his gaze is at the mercy of his neck, not his eyes. It's all about where the eyes need to get next, what's important for him to know. The bird boy emerged in glorious detail, the data explained in such delightful and unexpected terms that the ticker halted right there because, just like that, he had made a world for you to hold in your hand, a bird boy at its center. His choice of words split you up the middle, and from that night on, you'd be holding in your guts with your hands. You were determined to ignore the unnerving feeling that he'd seen you coming. His thoughts were made for you. You decided to test him. What would you call your autobiography? How right I was, how right. Exclamation mark, maybe 2. If he came up with that just for you, you will never let him go. Then he said, I think perhaps Hole in My Bucket could be volume 1 for you. You smiled lopsidedly. He hated the work ethic here in the US, despised the lack of holidays and the unspoken dictates of the psychiatry department he was part of, the ass-licking robots that he worked with. But he was yet to specialize and so was still kowtowing to a cigar-smoking mentor who made shameless millions in condoms and recycled paper in China, and who insisted on calling him Hank. What's his name, you asked? Frank. You smiled full and equal smiles. We'll leave it there for now.
Wow.
Hello.
Hi, Rachel, and hi, everyone who's joining us this evening on YouTube. We wish we could have you all in our beloved Burley Fisher basement, but we're also glad that perhaps some people who are outside the UK, outside London, are able to join us this evening. So welcome, international book fans. If we were in the basement, obviously we'd be encouraging you to grab something from the bar and tip your bartenders. As we can't do that, we're going to encourage you to buy hundreds of copies of Rachel's book from us to give to all your friends and family and enemies for Christmas, because enemies deserve Christmas presents as well. And one of the themes, my very grown-up A-level analysis of the book is that this is, at least in part, a book about something I think a lot of us have felt, maybe politically as well as socially and personally, over the last few years, which is regret. And Rachel is actually an expert on regret, not just creatively and in terms of imaginative fiction, but in terms of the actual science of regret, science being a thing that we all believe in. You're a neuroscientist who studies affect as well as a writer, and you actually started a project called the National Facility, I'm just getting the words right, for the regulation of regret, which also turns up as one of Henry's projects in the novel. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about that crossover between your scientific work and writing fiction. How do you manage it in your brain? And you've given us an example there of how it manifests, how the narratives you encounter in science come into fiction. But how do you see that crossover, and how do you work with those different kinds of thinking and writing?
I feel like I am kind of tunneling through compressed earth when I bring the two things together, because neither of them wants to give the other one enough room. They're both kind of like jealous of each other and want to keep the other one down. And so I find it really difficult to find a middle way. And fiction was my first attempt to do that, to bring them together in a way that I hoped would not have one as the jewel and one as the bezel, more like they were equals in it. This is something that I find almost impossible. I am trying to do it now, writing nonfiction, but looking at kind of like the neuroscience versus the poetry of regret and other issues, and see which one best corroborates experience. So the National Facility for the Regulation of Regret started out as I used to just say it to people to see if it was plausible, and the kind of like the realization that it could be a thing used to like creep up their face like a blush, and I got some terrible like sadistic joy out of this, because obviously it's not real, but people believed it could be, and this made a difference to me. I started to realize that plausibility was what I was after, but I had to keep all my workings kind of underground. And so I built a quasi-institution in a gallery and made it a place where people had checked themselves in once their regrets got out of hand. I had the opening night was an art show for one of the invisible and yet present by her personal belongings clients of the facility, called oh my God, Lassie Fortune was her name, and she was addicted to doing her own body modifications. And through her art, we learned her story and her personal effects. I'd been really influenced, I remembered the other day, by Leanne Shapton's book. I don't know if you remember that one, Artifacts from, the big, long title, which was the lot catalogue of a relationship, different objects which reflected a relationship. And I'm really interested in fiction and in installation, in kind of putting together hunting and divining when it comes to finding what the narrative is. So just allowing people to fill in the gaps themselves is very exciting to me, but to be a little bit in control of that too. So for instance, in the book, I use the second person for Astrid and first person for Henry. And I felt like that gave me a kind of bonus space where people could allow their brains to go, perhaps. Some people, I'm sure, will not agree with that and won't like it. But my intention was to create a more room for the reader to bring what they will to it. So, the actual installation was in 2015, and yet in the book, I have Henry as a younger man predicting that he will open this facility once he grows up, as it were. Oh, I can't hear you anymore.
Readers can judge for themselves whether that seems likely.
Yes, yeah.
In terms of his growing up. And I love the second person for Astrid, because one of the things that happens in the book is there's literal hunting. Astrid is hunted by paparazzi, by what we might call citizen paparazzi now on social media. And there's even like one of the most hallucinatory scenes in the book is with hunting dogs in the courtyard of a museum. And Astrid has this kind of, she's a summation of a lot of different figures in our popular culture. The figure of the singer who can make us feel our feelings. She's an emerging songwriter whose work becomes powerful very quickly, and it's something about the rawness of her feelings that seems to strike audiences, including Henry, although he thinks he can control it. And one of the reasons Astrid falls in love with Henry is this perfect mixtape that she received. And I was just wondering, what were you listening to when you were writing the book? Or was it impossible to listen to music because you were creating your own sound worlds for Astrid as you were writing?
Well, I think I was more influenced in what I saw as a motivation of certain songwriters. So anyone who is writing about love as a damaging and soul-tearing experience is the kind of thing I'm drawn to. And I've recently been thinking a lot about the relationship between dancing and fighting, and I do feel like those things are much more closely related than we like to think in terms of performance. So anything really, I was listening to anything that got me fired up and put me in mind of the kind of raw power of women, mostly. Although there is an exception, which is the Love Interruption by Jack White is something that can get me to places very quickly, imaginatively. But one of the things I wanted to say about the mixtape idea was that, and as it happens in the book, the mixtape it's not a straightforward issue between Astrid and Henry, and I just found it, again, I think I must have some kind of sadistic tendencies, because I kind of enjoyed vocalizing through Henry quite a lot, letting out the bad side of myself, I think. But the idea of having someone make a mixtape and it go to the wrong person I just found too delicious for words. I just found it absolutely compelling as something that would pull the narrative along. And so I wanted to investigate what the ramifications of that could be.
Well, I've recorded it. I haven't watched it yet, but I'm really looking forward to watching Akram
Oh,
Khan's
yes.
documentary about doing
Yes,
martial
yeah.
arts. His thinking about masculinity and the way that your book is thinking about masculinity. I know there's something of a project there for you.
Yes, absolutely.
As well.
Yeah.
But I think we would also all like Rachel Genn's soul tearing playlist on Spotify.
Oh, yes, yes.
Soul tearing.
I would definitely like to do that. I've also considered doing something about the books that influenced my writing of this book on the new bookshop. You know, you can curate your own little groups of books. I might do it for Burley Fisher, actually.
Please do. We've been sharing some of our lists, and we'd love to share your lists. Yes, send it along, and we'll set it up and shout it out. That would be great. And I'm specifically interested as a nerd in science writing that's influenced you, because we're living in a bit of a fantastic age. You know, there's this whole category that's, I think, a bit weird, but it's called thought.
Yeah, I remember it.
Books that have thought, but writers like Carlo Rovelli, but then also like Donna Haraway, Catherine McKittrick. There's just an explosion of writing about science and science history. I was wondering, like, who are your go-tos who do the science and really nail the writing?
Yeah, I think I am more of a person who looks for writers who are obviously interested in science and or are science adjacent, but also scientists who can write for anyone. So people like Douglas Hofstadter, Donna Haraway, but people who can take very complex and mobile ideas and translate them for anyone. So Douglas Hofstadter's work on the formation of concepts and the role of conceptual formation in creativity is extremely interesting to me. Also, books which are naive and humble in their angle on science and or human behavior. So the book which I wish I'd written, I've just written an Aeon piece about creativity and about the value of fostering reverie for creativity. And I was looking a lot at the book I wish I'd written, which is The Soul of the White Ant by Eugene Marais. And it is just the most magnificent and, like I say, humble, almost naive view of termite life. And I promise you, it is absolutely magical. If you don't have a copy, you should get a copy. It's really, really superb. Who else? I go to people like Anne Carson, who talk her essay. What's it called? Essay on Which I Think the Most, or I can't remember the exact title. It's something.
I think it's Essay on What I Think About the Most.
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah,
that's something I go back to again and again, because it is a lot of kind of like cognitive science distilled down to poetry. And that kind of thing I find like a creative stock cube. You can like hydrate it however you want, put a bit of whatever juice comes out of you into it. This is getting terrible. And it will create something completely new. And there aren't very many, well, of course there will be millions, but I don't have very many that I go back to often. That is certainly one I go back to at least 3 or 4 times a year. But as for straight up science writers, I'm not so interested in that. I'm more interested in the angles, the filtering through the person that I can feel in the writing.
I'm 100% there with you with Anne Carson, and I love this image of the stock cube. And great also to hear Douglas Hofstadter, who was such a big deal in the 90s. He was like the person whose book you had that you hadn't read, and it was, you know,
you got it out,
Stephen Hawking,
you got it
Hofstadter, and people went, "Oh, you're super smart." So one of the stock cubes for what you could have won, if I may, is a literal box. It's the box set of The Sopranos. Yeah. And one of the things that I really like, tangent, but we'll come back to The Sopranos, about the book is the mixture of technologies. So it's a book that's set now, but there's CD mixtapes, there's old-fashioned wall-mounted telephones, there's DVD box sets rather than Netflix. Like, it feels, it gives the book this kind of slightly floating sensation, but they're also all things we're familiar with. But The Sopranos really is like the concentrate at the heart of the book. And I was wondering if you maybe wanted to read one of the passages that's about Astrid and Henry, or Astrid without Henry, watching or thinking about The Sopranos.
Yeah, I will do.
I'm sure a lot of people have been reconnecting with it during lockdown.
Yeah. Again, I was really interested in using The Sopranos to run a current through their relationship, see how much they could stand. And I don't know if I said this to you already, but the novel started out as a longish short story, which is mostly the chapter called Box Set, actually. Yeah, although it has been split up a little bit. But I started out wanting to write about how a relationship could degrade over the course of a box set, and what the pushes and pulls were of the relationship and the box set, and how porous the individuals were to this triangulation between the box set, one person and the other. I am making it sound very interesting, I hear myself. But I will read here a bit about, it's from quite a long way, it's towards the end of the book, actually. And it's where Astrid is really concentrating on what has been happening the whole time. She hasn't been aware of this all the way through, but now she's realizing that perhaps it wasn't the Band-Aid box set that she'd been hoping for. What would happen was this. The opening bars of the theme tune focused you on Henry's take on these finely scripted mobsters' behaviors. Was he jealous? What exactly was his type among the women around Tony? Would he look bored during a blowjob? Immersion for you was not possible because surrounding you, there had to be a thin sheath of your own version of the episode to breathe in, just so you could survive it. You watched how Henry reacted. Before you knew it, you were pretending that you totally got why it meant to be a man in Tony's world. That is, by willfully misunderstanding for the sake of your sanity, you had become an enabler of monsters. More than that, an advocate of hatred. A hatred that bent ludicrously back at you, like the round-the-corner gun in Campbell's Believe It or Not. How so? Wasn't this box set a gift for you both? A shared patronage of that world? Now you had to suffer the shame of becoming invisible once you'd sneaked Henry into it. Invisible people still bleed and die. You had to protect yourself, and that had meant becoming visible in a new way. You know now. The Sopranos had been the wrong backdrop. You should have chosen something less caustic, less intimate, shittier. The consistent pounding force of the stories bent you out of shape. Astonished that people could feel they were owed so much from life, you wanted it right along with them. Primed but never receiving, you were yoked to these dogs without getting any action. The end of an episode brought a flood of blame and lust and spite and cruelty, after watching barrel-chested men raking through other lives like thick rolls of barbed wire. How should you displace the discomfort of comparing the motives of these men with Henry's? Without breathing in, there was a suffocating strain of trying to give form to the vapours that seeped from these TV baddies, but being careful not to taste what exactly it was that they would be satisfied with, conquered by. To stay alive in that atmosphere meant becoming a cloud that they could walk through, or a clump of drizzle, a bank of miserable cloud to bounce their massive fuselage, the bellies of their jets against. You started to blame the women on screen, witnessing the agony of someone who is unloved when they think they are loved, produced a pain that had to be transformed, leaving no room for pity. Leave it there.
Wow. And that final phrase makes it sound that like this is a very brutal book. And actually it's full of compassion.
I hope so.
Even as you say, for Henry, who's someone who's so caught up in his own myths of his white male superiority, there's a compassion, there's a possibility that he can learn and change, which for me is symbolized by Astrid's dream image of Tony Soprano in Melfi's skirt. This idea that Tony could become the therapist. It's like an image that's framed in my mind. And
God, I'm so happy about that, because the whole idea of using the Sopranos, I think, was its fate was sealed when it was Melfi that was the one who welcomed him into the world of the story. She was a woman, a professional, who he was having to open up to. He was so uncomfortable about that. And that was my road in, really. That was my road into the power of that particular box set.
And I really feel it. And that role, that therapist role, is so important in the book. There's lots of different kinds of therapists and therapies, some more quacky, some more successful. And a lot of what the book is about is addressing different kinds of addictions, our addiction to celebrity, our addiction to social media, but also addictions to drugs, food, and then experiences like regret. And I was just wondering, like, where do you situate like language and reading and writing? Do we binge on them? Do we binge on books the way we binge on TV, or are they a kind of cure? There's a kind of art cure that Astrid is somewhat questionably offered.
Yes.
And then also her own writing, her songwriting. So what do we think? What do you think? Are writing and reading addictions or cures, or both?
I think that I just said to someone actually before I came here tonight, why have I chosen a profession which means I have to sit under bollock crushing exam conditions every day? Why have I done this to myself? And yet here I am each morning still doing it. I think that a lot of what happens during writing and reading, both being creative endeavors, is that we transform what we are allowed to transform. I feel like writing that doesn't transform the impulse correctly is sometimes a kind of a Rorschach blot of things that the writer has been harmed by. And in that, you are too much part of it then. You need to be able to let go of yourself. I think Celia Paul, the artist, says it beautifully. Of course, I can't remember how beautifully she says it, but it's something like, you have to be in it and miles away from it at the very same time, so that it can have a life of its own, so that it can be something new at the end of your interaction with it. One of the things I've been recently writing is about the relationship that builds up between you and the writing. And that one of the hells of lockdown for me was not being allowed to flirt with the work because people were watching me. I didn't even know I did that until people were close by and could hear me and almost sense my thoughts. I felt very constrained by not being able to interact with it in an intimate way. So yeah, curing or abetting, I think it's a bit of both. I think we look to reading and writing for different things at different times. An interesting thing to me, and one of the reasons why I wrote the piece on cultivating reverie, was that so many people in these times of serial anticipation are unable to immerse themselves anymore, be it creatively themselves or just reading a book or watching a film. And I find this massively interesting. I just think it's the kind of machinery that is getting used up in the computation of anticipation has quite a lot to do with what we like to still when we're creating something. So these are all very interesting questions, I think.
For listeners, viewers who are interested in this idea of stilling the constant computation, we have an event coming up with Julia Bell for her event book Radical Attention, published by Peninsula Press, which also touches on some of these issues, perhaps not from the neuroscientific perspective that Rachel is bringing, but as a personal history of the interaction with social media and what it's like to be a creative person in this era. So I think we need a lot more to read about this, a lot more to give us space to think about it. So that's what's coming up next for us. But what's up next for you? You mentioned some work about violence and fighting. The book ends, we should say, with Astrid about to have another burst of creativity, and was that kind of a message to yourself to keep going? It's a beautiful ending.
I wanted it. I said the other day when I was speaking to Andrew Macmillan that I really wanted to recreate the feeling that I had when I came out of Thelma and Louise. I wanted the shape, the arc, where I don't know what the name of that curve is, the mathematical name, but where I just wanted people to be suspended in hope. I wanted the car to be able to go up if it wanted. I wanted to magic, and I just wanted to. All the way through this book, I was working forward from certain impulses and backward from others. Then I had the kind of matrix that was set up time-wise, point of view-wise, and it became a bit of a 3D cat's cradle, which I was absolutely not in control of at some points. But that's one of the joys, in inverted commas, of making a 3D tapestry, not writing. So yeah, it was an interesting process. But really, what I wanted to have Astrid at the end absolutely brimful of possibility. And I needed her to have been the places she went for that to have the impact that it had. So I hope that it did. I hope it was the ending that I imagine it is. I've only discovered really a lot of what I was writing about from people telling me in reviews and stuff since. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, that's what I meant. I meant to do that. Yeah, that was it.
Having had that, is that going to shape where you go next? Now that you've got all these brilliant insights. No, I'm curious about, now that you've got like the reviews of your scientific experiment, can you take those strategies forward?
I had already started writing after being invited to give a talk on the role of regret in reverie, actually, and how it might be a roadblock to our creativity. I gave a talk at an anthropology conference in Scotland a couple of years ago, and from that, and from talking to my mentor, Amanda Revetz, I decided I would write a book called Hurtling about reverie and creativity and the neuroscience, like I said, versus the poetry and literature of reverie, so that we could come to some kind of like consensus about how useful both of these things are, and how they can be brought together to be even more useful than they are alone. So that's one of the things I've been writing on. And I have been also putting together a collection of essays, short essays, not essays, short, more like phenomenological pieces, experience pieces about fights that I was in, and in my youth, and the idea of regret being a spur to creativity as well as an inhibitor of behavior. So it's less knowledge based, more experience based, but I hope two very different beasts, and I hope both worth writing, she says.
I feel like this is the perfect point to let you get back to both of them, especially hearing that you're a fighter. even with lockdown, I want to be really respectful. I see you come by the Tony Soprano, honestly.
Yes.
I think it's been a brilliant, amazing 40 minutes, and we're going to round off and give people a chance to absorb everything they've heard this evening. We're going to post the video on Twitter tomorrow, and if people have questions, we'll tag Rachel and you can ask them then. Do you share the video with friends and get them to, they can ask for a friend if you're feeling like the whole fight and reputation is getting
I feel like I've really bigged that up now. Please, I don't want to fight anyone, thanks. Since I was 17 or something.
I mean, I would fully understand if you did. It's a fighty world right now, and what you could have won is a brilliant release. I'm not going to say escape, because it brings us into the world we're in as well, but it's also this kind of hallucinatory release, as Rachel says, of going to and through dark things driven by past experiences and coming to a place of possibility and strength. And it feels like just the book we need in the world right now. If you're a subscriber, there's a signed copy coming to you with a special piece of ephemera. It's not too late to sign up for the subscription as well and get a copy and a present. And thank you, Rachel, not just for joining us this evening, but for all the time working on this book, especially having it all in your head in lockdown. So a round of virtual applause for Rachel from all of us. Thank you.
Thank you.
And good night. Thanks to everyone for joining us. And we'll see you at the next Burley Fisher online, Not in the Basement event. Thank you all.